Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Farhad Dastur. I'm an educator in the psychology department at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in Vancouver, Canada. I'm also the principal investigator at KPU's Virtual Reality Lab. To begin, I want to acknowledge the 5 campuses of KPU are located on the unceded and traditional territories of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Kwikwetlen peoples. In the Halkomelem language, the name Kwantlen means tireless runner or tireless hunter. In 1981, Grand Chief Joe Gabriel of the Stolo Nation granted our institution permission to use the Kwantlen name. Today, we speak that name with pride. Today's talk is by my friend Sean Ronan, one of the principals at the creative digital studio Hammer Tong. This talk is number 4 in our VR Lab speaker series. These talks are designed to explore the rich possibilities of extended realities and to showcase their diverse applications in education, health, art, the sciences, industry, entertainment, and social justice. Our talks are designed to be accessible to people regardless of experience level, and we will always give ample time for questions. These talks will also be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, which you can find at kpuvrlab.com. The VR Lab was founded in 2019. Supported by a KPU Creative Capital Fund grant, we have a dedicated space at our Richmond campus equipped with VR headsets, sensors, cameras, and computers. Members of the lab include student research assistants, practicum students, honor students, faculty, and alumni. Current lab members include Dr. Karen Davison and the following 10 student or alumni lab members: Andre Buccini, Calvin Campbell, Jasmine Chen, Zerlinda Chow, Kieran Dogra, Kayla Garvin, Simi Kaur, Sophie Lynn, David Murray, and Josie Steves. If you're interested in a creative collaboration with us, please contact me at farhad.dastur@kpu.ca. I'd now like to hand over the event to Josie Steves, who will be moderating today's talk.
Awesome. Hello, and thank you, Dr. Dastur. I would like to again welcome everyone to the KPU Virtual Reality Speaker Series. My name is Josephine Steves, and I am a 4th-year KPU student and a member of the VR Lab. Just a reminder that the talk is going to be recorded, so if you would not like to be seen or heard, please turn off your microphone and video. After the talk, there will be a good chunk of time dedicated to questions. If at any time you would like to ask a question during the talk, feel free to type your question in the chat box, and I will anonymously read it out at the end of the session. Again, any questions asked in the chat box will be read out loud anonymously. If you would like to use your microphone to ask a question, raise your hand using the icon on the top of your screen. I will call out your name, and you can go ahead and unmute yourself and turn on your camera to ask your question. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's talk speaker. Oops, I did it again, Learning to Love My Mistakes in Design by Sean Ronan. Reflecting on his 5 years in XR production, Sean Ronan offers insight into his bigger creative blunders, the best or at least better practices he has learned along the way, and the comfort of coming to accept that failures isn't just part of the process, it is the process. A little bit about Sean. He is a co-founder of Hammer Tong, where he produces, designs creative narrative content. His work is increasingly transmedia in nature, shifting between digital and XR, and often focuses on culturally significant and often culturally sensitive content, especially stories that address the historical experiences of marginalized communities. He is currently leading development on Valley, a narrative AR game companion to Shadow of the Rougarou, a forthcoming limited series on APTN, and components of his Chinatown XR are on exhibit at the Museum of Vancouver. And that is it for me. So I'll pass the floor over to Sean Ronan, and you can take it away.
Hi, thank you so much, Josie, and thank you, Farhad, for inviting me to speak. And thanks those of you who are here for taking the time, especially as I know it's a busy end of semester for you. So appreciate that. Just a note, and not to override Josie's excellent procedures, totally open to questions at any point. So please don't hesitate if anything I say confuses or contradicts or whatever, please don't hesitate. I'd love this to be a back and forth and as engaging for all of us as possible. That all being said, I'm here to talk about my mistakes, which is a good little experiment for me. It's like I've been trying to, I was saying this to Farhad earlier, like trying to find sort of a nice way to approach these presentations that I can feel fresh and updated. And something I've really been reflecting on recently is, just how valuable the lessons we learn from making mistakes are. And I think hopefully that'll be, relevant. So you'll find some relevance in what I have to say, just reflecting on some of the projects that I've been working on over the last few years. I will share some slides and talk through those as I go. Is that visible to people?
Yep, looks good.
Super cool. So first, a quick note about myself. I originally from Northern Ireland, moved to Vancouver when I was a young child with my parents. Definitely consider the Pacific Northwest to be home. I studied at UBC a long while ago and haven't had to deal with end of semester struggles in quite some time. Took me a while to find my rhythm as to what I was trying to do with myself. Spent a bit of time working as a journalist overseas, really kind of like interested in stories and telling them. But it was 2011 when I came back from a successful but financially unrewarding stint doing overseas coverage in Southwest Asia that I first turned my attention to media and into producing. And since then, that sort of stone has rolled and grown larger. It's a strange metaphor, but sort of the process is kind of self-replicated. And I've found myself over the last decade, initially working as an independent film producer, then moving into forming a company with my partner, James, that has moved from strictly dealing with sort of branded cinema into more entertainment television. And then since 2016, XR, initially sort of virtual reality, and then the last 2.5 years with a focus on augmented reality as well. We're a small company. Because of that, I wear a number of hats, some of which you can see displayed on screen there. Kind of find my time being split between being that producer, being an entrepreneur, which, running a company, and all that entails, and then the stuff that I really like to do, which is to creatively direct and design content. And so it's a constant sort of juggle that I'm trying to sort of balance those three things, and just to like contextualize, like that's where my experience comes from. So this won't be strictly any one thing, but I am going to try to focus on, what I've learned in the design of XR. As far as our team, we're a small crew. There's a core of us of 7 with 5 or 6 others who are regular collaborators on our projects. And as Josie nicely iterated off the start there, we're a diverse team, and we really are drawn to doing work that's relevant within the the modern context of Canada, that acknowledges the systemic and historical and ongoing challenges faced by marginalized communities. And we really try to find, I guess in the end, like what gets me out of bed in the morning is knowing that the content we're making isn't just strictly content. So we've been fortunate enough to do several years of really good work with the Kalani First Nation in Yukon, done some really great work with the Chinese Canadian community in Vancouver, especially around Chinatown, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And then over the last few years, some collaborations with Métis filmmakers and creatives in exploring 19th century Métis history insofar as the colonial context. So that's what we do. That's us at the Vancouver Asian Film Festival just a couple of weeks ago, which was the first time I'd seen such a large group of people in quite a while. It was very nice. Hopefully the future is getting more like that. So I'm going to quickly introduce the work, which I'd like to look at 4 projects that I've done over the last few years, kind of just as a reference point for the challenges and the lessons that I've learned. So I'll run through those, and then I'll sort of treat each of them a little bit more specifically. The first one is actually an ongoing project that's still on display at the Museum of Vancouver until January, and now actually has a satellite exhibit in Chinatown. It's called A Seat at the Table, and it's a really just amazing exhibition put on by the museum in partnership with UBC's Asian Migration Studies Department. And our team contributed the digital media components to this. So we made a large number of mixed digital media projects, including some animated augmented reality, some 360 VR, and then like tablet-based interactive media, as well as some projection content. Super proud of this project, and for all the people who did an amazing job beyond what we modestly contributed. Would totally encourage people to check it out if you get the opportunity. 2-3 years before, so 2018, Rougarou, the one who eats human flesh. This was our first commercial VR project made in close collaboration with Gerald Auger, a Woodland Cree storyteller and director. And it's an interactive 360 virtual reality, like a branching narrative, choose your own adventure story set in the 19th century, looking at the Woodland Cree telling of the Rougarou, a sort of a supernatural embodiment of human greed. This piece was sort of born out of like our stereoscopic 360 film processes, and then was our first experiment with really like utilizing a game engine. We used Unity and effectively like allowed the user to navigate through various chapters of a story with like high stakes decision points between them. And this piece did really nicely. It premiered at Sitges in Spain, a large international horror festival, and still looks really good, I have to say. Chinatown XR is an ongoing work that we currently have sort of finished a prototype on and are now sort of turning our attention to next steps. It was a partnership with UBC's, the aforementioned UBC ACAM program, and it's like an AR, VR, like cross-platform narrative, focusing on family history within Chinatown and looking at the various significant interactions that one person, Monty Lee, had throughout his life. Began with him sort of standing up to his dad and deciding he was going to fight in the Second World War in an attempt to force the Canadian government to recognize Chinese Canadian citizenship. Then involves scenes where he returns, had that experience in the 60s and meets his to-be wife, and then some very like reflective meditations on him as an older person speaking with his granddaughter. So this involved like several different AR components, including one really nice like physical diorama, which users were able to look inside and see scenes happening, slices of life, and then sort of a mainstay VR experience where the user kind of joins Jenny, his granddaughter, and Monty as they walk through a recreation of Pender Street, which we modeled in according to 1940s maps, 1960s, and then also modern day. And then Seedling just wrapped up, and this is a pretty little like meditative art installation that was hosted at the Evergreen Cultural Center in Coquitlam on Lafarge Lake. Location-based AR, where we worked with artist Min Yoon to like project these high-definition 3D models of cedar seedlings onto the lake, and explored sort of the reflective quality that we were able to bring out, including trying to like incorporate like real-time dynamic daylight. Super nice project. It was sort of visible all through the summer to pretty great success actually. And Min and I have just now started planning for what our next iterations might be. So those are the 4 projects I'm going to talk about. Any any questions at this stage before I jump into my mistakes? Fantastic. So that being said, what I want to talk about mistakes, but really what I want to try to do today is bring you all into the decisions that we necessarily need to make in creative projects, and kind of the context that goes into making them, and then dealing with the often less than ideal results that occur, the mistakes, all the while trying to develop a design practice as well as a process. And kind of core to this is how this all happens in real time. And so it's easy to look back on something as a mistake when you've done it, but of course, when you're actually in it, it's never quite so clear, which is why we make the decisions that we do. So before we jump into decisions about mistakes, and I don't know, my relationship with mistakes professionally has just been, I don't know, I guess my professional career has always been about mistakes, because with my very first film project, the Vagabond project, I deleted it accidentally. I had it on 786 gigabytes of four months of filming documentary, and then one day I accidentally pushed the wrong button on a hard drive and reformatted everything, and it was all gone, which is a pretty ignominious way to start a media career, but also taught me a really important lesson, and I've never really lost any significant data since. And that's kind of the lens I want to bring to this, is that, every step, whether left or right, it yields lessons, and really every time we're trying to do something more than we know we can do, that's taking risk, and risk requires that we might make mistakes. And I think accepting that is one of the most helpful things I've been able to do professionally, is to not worry about making the mistake beforehand. And then after realizing that I have to quickly try and understand the lesson that's contained within it. And I say this because I think there's a lot of polarized, I noticed this in communicating with my team and with colleagues, a lot of polarized responses to words like mistakes or to failure, to things that are bad, quote unquote. And I know that's a struggle, because it's difficult. It's a difficult notion to sit with, that we might be trying our best and that still might not be, quote unquote, good enough. But I do think, given my limited experience, that it's really helpful to accept that, all of the efforts we make are imperfect, right? Because we're always trying to do more than we know we can do. And they're all part of the larger process of trying, of learning, and of taking risks, in attempting to sort of do that which is currently unknown. So with that being the way of understanding mistakes, I'd like to look at some of them. There we are. So chapter 1, Chinese food. A seat at the table is a large exhibition that supersedes my involvement in it, and that looks at the history of Chinese Canadian migration through sort of thematic lens of food, and of restaurants, and of those as vessels of transmitting culture and maintaining connection with one's heritage. And we were brought into the project as media partners, and quickly found this. I mean, has anybody seen the exhibition? I'll just ask quickly. As I say, it's great, and I'm super proud of it. But it was expansive, and so we were brought on thinking, initially we're just going to do a little bit of VR. That morphed into doing some VR and some AR and some projection material, as well as some tablet games, and that created a really difficult challenge as to how to design consistently across these very different media, right? There are best practices that are very, very different for each, and obviously within something as branded and sort of contained as an exhibition, you want consistency. The choice that we found ourselves sort sort of asking, I'm going to throw this to you guys, because this is what I'd like to kind of bring you into, is like the decision that we faced. So, we had a restaurant experience in VR. We had a First World War history in AR. We had a language application showing the different dialects throughout China, as well as several other experiences and a bunch of projection content. And so the question that we were faced with was like, so do we make, like, we have to lean some way? Do we try to like design this in a way that's like tablet friendly? Do we make it all so it's AR friendly, VR friendly? We try to create some sort of like beautiful synthesis, or do we just accept that we can't and just sort of go for a compromise? Wondering thoughts about what the best choice in that situation would be to make. Yeah, it's tough, I know. Well, we decided we'd make it tablet friendly, and ultimately like reduced the impact and the quality, I think, of the augmented reality and the virtual reality, because we felt that more users would use the tablet and would be more, I guess, familiar with tablet interfaces. So to try and appeal to as many of the users as we might. And like these decisions come out of, time and resources. And like, I think the best thing to do would be to have done like a synthesis of all three, and really kind of let each media like breathe in its own way. But we did not know how to do that sufficiently given the restraints we were on. And what that led to was basically like, the tablet material looks great. The VR and AR material have definitely taken a hit because they have more interface than they should. And this is something I've like learned time and time again in XR, that just it's got to be so careful with interface because it's immersive. There's this tension of wrecking the suspension of disbelief the more interface that you have. And so that lesson that I've taken from that is really that the best interfaces are the ones that are invisible. And by invisible, I don't mean like actually non-existent or invisible, but ones that the user doesn't notice. It's like sound in a movie. Like the moment you notice the interface, you're being taken out of the user experience. And certainly with immersive media, this is like completely counterproductive to that which they provide. Chapter 2 follows up on that because your interfaces can't be too invisible. With Wigtagu, the choose your own adventure Woodland Cree story, we quickly found ourselves like enthralled and wrapped up with the branching narrative and being able to create contingencies where the user would be able to impact later sequences through making choices. And we really like circled around this idea of high stakes choices as being ways to enhance the user's experience, to get them to lean into that which was important. However, like there's not much fun. There's less fun when you're playing a game and you're making a choice. It's obviously much more fun if you are caught up in the making of it. And so the challenge we quickly encountered there was like, how do you disguise choices so as to support a continuation of suspended disbelief? And 3 clear choices to us were, well, make the choice obvious and risk that the user might fall out of it a little bit. Make it subtle, which, obscure that, but, risk the user not, maybe realizing there's a choice to make, or just don't, and kind of like create a choreography, kind of fake the fact that there are choices to be made. I'm wondering if anyone's got any thoughts about which of these seems like the best idea.
I'm a fan of subtlety.
Yeah, I was going to say me too, but kind of like in a sense that it's subtle that the person would make the choice without knowing they make the choice, but it's still like they chose like a direction, like not necessarily like a fork in the road that's very obvious, but it's like, oh, I could pick between a few different objects or something. That's what's going on in my brain. But yeah.
That's a great answer, Josie. We actually did employ at times forks in the, like literal forks in the road, to be completely honest. But yeah, we went with subtlety, but I think we went too subtle, much too subtle. And so the screenshot there is from the experience, and you can see this talisman that so this is the user's body. This is your POV from the experience, and we have this talisman there, and we hid a choice so deep that if you looked at this talisman, I think there was like a 4 or 5 second event window. If you looked at it at the right time, that would create a contingency that allowed for a unique ending to happen. But it was completely unclear that that could happen. And there was nothing to really direct the user to know that there was a choice to be made. And so is effectively not really there, because the user does need to know they're making a choice on some level. Otherwise, it just feels like randomness. And we spent a lot of time on our postmortem just thinking like, how on earth did we think, like, just there's nothing there to guide you to thinking that you're making a choice. And so obviously I think subtlety was the right direction, but I think it's always so, and this was earlier in our career with XR, where we were still kind of coming in to understand the notion of user experience and of user-centered design. It's so important to put yourself in the user's shoes with every assumption, because what's subtle to those of us who are on the back end might be impossible to see to those on the front end. And so the real lesson there, and one that I think applies for anything that's interactive or three-dimensional, is that successful interactivity, it's a collaboration between the creator and the user. And you need to, like, coming from film initially, like film thrives off of direction, and you choose the shot, and you choose the order of the shot, and you choose the angle, and you choose the cutaway, and you tell the user what to look at, and then you play sound and music and tell them how to feel. And there's not, if you do that well, there's not too much of a chance of getting an unexpected outcome. Once you add any level of interactivity, you create a variable whereby a user responds in a way that you don't anticipate. And I think it's of the utmost importance to give, as the first time we filmed in 360, I was just blown away, because all of a sudden there's no such thing as a close-up. There's no such thing as as an edit. It's just the user can look wherever they want. And so if you put something of high importance in your scene that the user needs to look at, well, they might not, unless you really like delicately guide them to it. And even then, they might not, because it's interactive and they're the input. And this is a lesson I continue to learn. Every time we make something interactive, someone just immediately goes off and breaks it in a way that we never thought possible. Always be thinking about your user, and understand that even who your user is, like, there's just so many assumptions that something I was trying to work this in, and I couldn't totally work out how to discuss it. But something I've been reflecting on a lot recently is the danger of leading with your assumptions when you're making things for a user that will be interactive. And it's a tension, because we have these ideas and we trust our instincts that they're good ideas, and so we roll with them. But then we start to build assumptions about what is good without necessarily having the feedback from the user that validates that. And I think it's just of the utmost importance to be, sourcing that feedback, testing, and remembering just how many different users there are. And the best experiences, the best applications are those that are enjoyable across as wide an audience as possible.
So, Sean, if I could jump in there, do you think that's where empathy comes in to help solve that issue?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. Yes, I mean, like empathy. I think if we can attain empathy in our users, then a lot of other things can be, um, you know, we don't need to worry about as many other things. Like I was watching a film at VAF a few weeks ago, and it was an okay film, but it had a great protagonist, and she was awesome and defiant and wanted to save her dad, so she went off to do this awesome journey. And like because I had that connection with her, I was willing to overlook all sorts of things, technically about the film that I might not have enjoyed so much. So I think that's absolutely possible. Um, but I guess, and maybe throw this back to you, like empathy is not something you can necessarily assume in a user, or that not that people will empathize with the same things. And so I'd say like to get your user to empathy is certainly the goal. It there's not just one way to, there's not just one direction to all users. But with the overall point, for sure, I think like as much as we can establish connection between users and the essence of what an experience is, I think that is the key.
Yeah, I think I was thinking more in terms of maybe the design thinking process. So with your subtle choice, um, what if that you had brought users in to kind of field test it, and that would have emerged, right? Some might have got it right away, but the majority might not have. And that might have given you that early feedback while you were still in the iterative phase of the project where you could tweak it and maybe create different, options or opportunities for people to get it.
1000%. Um, I've become like a broken record now with my team, where I used to be someone who would just lead a night, like, let's do this, this will be great. And now it's just test, 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 test,
Mm-hmm.
test. Early stage, low fi, paper prototype, role
Yeah.
play thought through, like absolutely. Like the collaborative experience begins with the very first conceptualization, and finding is actually super helpful because I've always struggled with the marketing distribution like side of things. It's just not really where my brain goes, and the number of times I've kind of put together a target audience profile without really feeling like there was anything to it. What I found recently is that it that should naturally come out of your testing, right? And so we just did a great activity the other day for a new project that we're beginning on, sort of, hey, core team, let's all us identify who we think our core audience is. Now let's go out and find some people who are that, and let's start to test with them so that we have like meaningful data about what
Yeah.
we think we're doing.
I mean, in a way, the testing phase, that low stakes testing phase connects with your theme about making mistakes because it allows those usability testers or participants in your video or whatever your game to make the mistakes, and you sit and observe and collect that information so that you can then iterate it to something better.
That's 100% going into the next version of this presentation. That's a nice, that is a nice connection. And for sure, right? I think it really nicely, like it as quickly as possible turns, what could be a, poor direction to go into something that can be informative and corrected. And that's, I think, absolutely, as you say, it's like it's really core to the notion of mistakes, right? Like doing so in a paper prototyping test has it's pretty insignificant. Like if you thought something was good and your 7 user testers say it wasn't, it's like, oh, okay, cool. It's much better. Like those mistakes are much easier to make at that stage than to have put a year of development into something only to realize that you were operating on invalid assumptions from the get-go. But thank you for that question, and some good food for thought for me too. So I'd like to take a quick break, as I was given some instruction recently that we shouldn't be sitting talking on Zoom for too long without sort of shifting the energy. And I thought, like, just because of what I was saying there before about, the subtle significance, I thought, we're all remote, we're in our spaces, probably spaces that we spent a fair bit of time in. And I was just wondering, encourage you to take, a minute or two, look around where you are and see if there's something new that you can notice. And I'll do the same. And it would be great if anyone wanted to share their revelation in a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to give that about 2 minutes. Take a look around, and we'll pick up in just then. So, does anybody have anything they want to share that they noticed in their immediate vicinity that they didn't notice before?
I can share.
Please.
The screws in my light switch cover, they're all facing the different directions.
Wow, that's
Just
weird.
something little. Yeah.
So good, right? Like the sort of thing that totally stands out if you take a moment or two to just look at it.
Yeah. I don't really look at the screws in the light switch often.
It makes you wonder, like, why is that the case?
Yeah.
Well, I intended to be doing this talk from my office, so I would have had more new things to comment on because I'm in a hotel room in Whistler, and I just noticed that on the wall is printed in large stenciled letters Whistler, which seems really strange to like have the name of the place that you're in on the wall.
Maybe just in case you forget.
Yeah, I guess it's helpful. It's not a place you're going to like wake up and suffer insomnia in, but
yeah, interesting.
Anybody else, or shall we get on to chapter 3? All right, on we go.
I don't see any. Yeah.
Sounds good. So, chapter 3, COVID. Last year, I mean, obviously we're still in a time of COVID, but last year, around March or April, things got a little strange. I'm sure the case was that for all of us. And it's in one sense, been a really interesting time that we've all had like a pretty shared experience. I'm going to obviously dial in and focus just on something to do with design, though, and that is how to keep moving forward in times of chaos. Because last January, we began development on Chinatown XR and had a very reliable, very familiar workflow and pipeline that we were going to use, and building off of the 360 videography we had learned in previous years, and like developed a Unity architecture from that. And then in March, everything went upside down, and like for 2 months, 3 months, there wasn't filming whatsoever. But certainly, like the beginning of April, I had 2 of my team out with COVID, and I had very little certainty that we would be able to continue as we had planned. So the choice that I was left with was like, do we postpone our current work schedule because we want to stick with the original live action execution? Do we flip to a different workflow, in this case animated, which at the time I knew nothing about? Do we pause and reimagine the project given the changing circumstances? Or do I just run off to Mexico? Those are the 4 choices, 3 really, but those are the 4 choices I was faced with. I'd be curious if anyone has thoughts as to which of those might be the right one.
Well, I would postpone live action. I'd then go to Mexico to reimagine the project, and I'd probably decide to flip to animation.
Beautiful synthesis.
Yeah, my idea wouldn't be too far from that, but I imagine reimagine the project would definitely be in there, because I know, especially with COVID, a lot of projects have been reimagined to fit with the circumstances, especially since you don't know how long it's going to go on to, right? But.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is what we should have done. I, however, chose to flip to animation, and this is an interesting thing about mistakes, like they're different levels, right? And so like I spent 2 weeks kind of like deep consideration on this, and then said, okay, well, I can get the animation team together, I think, to help me steer through this. Because ultimately I wanted to keep on schedule with my project, and that was successful. So that was a good choice, but the project suffered undoubtedly because of the unfamiliarity I had with the workflow, with the necessary resources and personnel to do it. And so I definitely think that if I could go back to April 1st, I would probably, I mean, I wouldn't go to Mexico because that wasn't an attractive thing at the time, I suppose, but I would definitely just take some time and go back to the drawing boards. And this kind of connects to what I was saying about assumptions. Like we need to be flexible, and we might have goals for a project at one point, but when something as significant as COVID happens, or when something as significant as like, stakeholders in a project change or resources change, it can be like something I'm reflecting on more and more is, the goals of a project outside of the planned execution. So like our goal was to present an immersive history of Chinatown, and we could have maybe decided to just lean into doing something web-based, and maybe could have found a better path towards that goal had we done so. Obviously, difficult times, and felt very much under the gun. But yeah, I think you guys are both correct that reconsidering and going back to the core of what the project's about would have been the right thing to do. The lesson that I think I learned well on the first part and not so on the second was that sometimes you do need to pivot, though, and if you do, you need to pivot. Like you can't pivot in a half measure. That's like, you can't stand in the middle of the street, so to speak. But before you do something as drastic as pivot, like really, really give it some thought, and not just about the pros and cons of choices, like insofar as, does this pivot answer the core goal that I set out to attain? Okay, so then chapter 4, lastly, we got seeds. Said, like, seedling, beautiful little reflective installation on Lafarge Lake. Anyone who's done any work in either AR or VR understands that they have similar but different challenges to accessibility. VR headsets are still expensive, although decreasingly so, which means lots of people aren't able to use them. AR requires certain types of smartphones to really perform, and so there's a built-in barriers to people using them. And something that, you know, as XR creators, we're always trying to do is like, how do we, you know, maximize as much as possible the accessibility and the breadth of the audience. At the same time, how to do so without losing quality. I was advising someone just recently. It was a really, really interesting, well-developed 6-stop VR experience that they want to make more accessible. And they're looking at like reformatting it for different headsets. And I said, like, if you want to solve this problem of like more people, then you just need to bake this into a 360 video, because then all of a sudden many more people can see it. But inherently that reduces the quality. At the same time, in building an AR app, if we're building it for, you know, iPhone 13, that makes it very exclusive, but it makes it the best it can be, versus if we make it so that everyone with an iPhone 6S onwards can use it, that will reduce the quality. The central tension on this project, and one that we struggled on for a bit, was like, so in developing this, it's a modest art project. Do we develop for iOS only? Do we develop for Android only? Or do we develop for both? Any takers?
I would probably choose, well, if I had the resources, iOS and Android, but if I didn't, then just Android. Because of the wider market share, you'll be able to get more people if you just do Android.
Well, I mean, that's global. iOS is definitely a slight market leader in North America, but I think that's a good point. Like, it's obviously resource contingent, and I think that's where we made our mistake, in that we decided we developed for both, and pushed our scant resources away from one simple development path onto two, and that was just terrible. Like, the project undeniably suffered from like resources being deployed to making two reasonably good applications work, as opposed to leaning into one. In this case, I think we should have chosen iOS because of the like the performative AR frameworks that iOS allows. So we've got two kind of all right versions instead of one really good one. And this is a lesson I'm employing like directly now on a new development that we're doing, which is like, before, like, accessibility is super important, 100%. And from both a like equity perspective, but also from a distribution perspective. However, there's no real point, I don't think, in focusing too much on that until you've got your thing as good as it can be. And so for this next project that we're working on, we'll be designing for the best device that our project needs. And once we've done that, we'll start to look, how do we expand this into other spaces? So yeah, I think that's kind of rounding it out for me. Chapter 5 is the future, or the now, where I've got lots more projects on the go. Shadow of the Rougarou, which was mentioned off the top, is really nice limited series we've just finished posting will go on to APTN's Lumi streaming service in April. We're also just beginning development on a companion AR game prototype called Valley of the Rougarou, which is going to be like kind of like Pokemon Go, but with werewolves chasing you. And we're continuing to work on like compiling our Chinatown, like our now vast Chinatown library into something that we can take forward into a production phase next year. Also doing a little bit of neat work on a project that's still kind of undefined as to whether or not it's going to be VR or projection, but that's based in Mesoamerican history and folklore, and working with a great Mexican artist on that. And then we're also doing some research into our own animation pipeline because once we pivoted into animation, that's really been kind of like a meaningful milestone for our studio. All of this to say, new projects are great chances to put these lessons into good use, but they're also great opportunities to make more mistakes. And I'm super thrilled to be looking at these projects, knowing that I'm already making mistakes with some of them, and that's okay because it's all process. And you just keep moving forward, learning from each step in trying to do better. And I think that's just, especially when we're dealing with like interactive, innovative, technological media, we just need to have that allowance for ourselves, because doing it perfectly is just, I don't think it's in the roadmap. And it's just nicer when you don't worry about doing things perfectly, when you can just appreciate the process for what it is. So thank you very much for your attention and for listening to me. I hope I didn't drone too much. I did keep my time on pace, so that's fantastic. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them, or discussion, or whatever might be appetizing.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. That was awesome. Kayla, you have a question. Go ahead.
Hi, yes, actually, I had a few comments that I made in the chat, but apparently you can't see it. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of fill in some interesting points that I found. Sean, when you were talking about originally trying to find a way to get users or players to recognize that something has happened, like you mentioned, what was it? Staring at a certain object for 5 seconds, and nobody, was able to kind of recognize that. That really reminded me of like some like the adventure games from the 1990s, where you had to do like some really obscure thing in order to proceed.
Yeah, like kind of like Myst, but
yeah,
also games that came afterwards, right?
Yeah. The one that instantly comes to mind is there's a puzzle in I've forgotten the name of the game, but it requires you to use like a deflated balloon, a stick, and a piece of wire in order to pick up a card from a railway. And I never was able to get by that without a guide. So I just wanted to say that I really felt you on that one.
Yeah, and I think it's like there's a line, right? Because it's like there are, and I think that we've seen that certainly in the last 10 years, some of like the indie puzzle games. Like there's definitely like there's a space for games that force you to think it out, but it's got to be beatable, right? And there's nothing.
It has
more
to be like it has
Mhm.
to be contained in its own logic, establishing a set of rules, and then you should be able to beat the game with the knowledge of those basic set of rules.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to that point, like with regards to the project that we're making, like that's on the creator, right, to make sure that logic is communicated clearly in time for the user to employ it, because it's really frustrating when things feel random, right? We quickly start to lose faith in an experience if it doesn't seem to conform to its own logic, whatever that logic might be.
Yeah, exactly. Like the best kind of game that you can create is a game where the entire game itself is the tutorial.
That's a very interesting way to frame it. That's good.
Well, of course, it's only successful if the player doesn't recognize the game itself as the tutorial.
And that's to the point about, invisible interface, right? Like, as much as you can obscure that which is happening, because that's what we do when we play games or watch movies, right? Like, we put our disbelief on hold for the emotional experience that we get from it. We know there are rules, we know there are contrivances, but we just don't ever want to be asked to look at them face on and then still be expected to remain immersed.
Exactly.
So, Sean, as an educator, of course, I have to ask an education-related question, right? And as I think about the 21st century skill sets and mindsets and competencies, I'm scared that we're not preparing our students for the world that you're actually living in right now. And some of the why I really resonated with your theme about risk-taking and making mistakes as a way of learning and seeing failure as a teacher is so important. It's important. That's how science works. That's how artistic, creativity works, right? Innovation. And yet the focus in education is in being right and not making mistakes. And we penalize students when they get mistakes and they get a lower grade, right? So the world of the world you're in now, and increasingly the world of the future, is not being represented correctly. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how we should be educating students, and in fact, are we doing a good job?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I've got like kind of two tracks of answer. Like one, and I do some consulting with industry groups with regards to like very, market-oriented needs for post-secondary. But I don't think, like, the question doesn't really, I don't think we're talking about jobs, like job skills and employability, but about, like the developing, nurturing the ability to be, sort of creative and to take risks and be creative. I don't know. I mean, school didn't really prepare me for the life I've lived, right? Like, I did a BA and had a double major and, thought I was going to go to law school, and then life happened. And it's a long, long ways away that I've come. And it's been a life very much of trial and error. I don't know if there's like a simple answer, because like on some level, like, I don't know, it's ingrained in education that there is like quantifiable metrics of performance. I would just say, like, if you're in school and struggling with that, like, don't sweat it, because the rigidity of that, like, it disappears the moment you graduate, right? The world, at least it has for me, like, what you will be measured by will be what you can do, what you have done, and those things very quickly become not quantifiable in the same way. And I've never actually physically picked up my degree. No one's ever asked to see it. It's never been like a relevant, the documentation has never been a relevant thing. The education, certainly valuable, and I've come to really appreciate that, especially, I think liberal arts function on a long arc, and it might not be until a decade later you're like, oh, that was really great that I learned to critically think like that, or to write a proper essay. But like, I hire people pretty regularly from various places, often they're right out of school. I'm not remotely concerned about how they performed in school. It's like, who are you? What can you do? All right, let's try this and let's see how we work together. And I think that's a lot. I mean, there are obviously going to be some credentialized professions that are very much the opposite, but certainly in the space that I live in, you know, startup, media, interactive, like there's so many people who are just self-taught. There's people who've got, you know, all that they needed to make their first game off of Udemy lectures, and no one's been like, do you have a computer science degree? Right? And my computer science degree programmer is, you know, stuck struggling with the pure math of rotational physics right now. And yeah, it doesn't really matter how he did in school. It's like, can he solve it now? That is the metric. So yeah, it's a big question. I think we could wax probably for quite some time about how the education system could be, you know, made more just treated differently. But I don't know. It's like when you're in school, you're in a bubble, and then you step outside of that bubble, and it doesn't work in quite the same way. Like, I won't turn this into a rant, but like I thought when I was young that like I'm the one who's late, and eventually I'll get to being an adult, and then I'll be on time, and everyone will be on time. Everybody's late on everything. Late on stuff, broadcasters late on stuff, third party, like everybody's late all the time. No one ever does anything on time. Still try to do stuff on time, but it's like, it's not like it's this perfectly functioning, like optimized world that that we need to adjust to. It's more like you need to adjust to the craziness of it all.
Right. Very cool.
Yes, very cool. Gives me some good feelings about graduating next semester.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, it's a whole new phase, right? And like, it could seem intimidating. It'd also be really exciting, right? Because like you've spent, you know, these years getting, you know, an opportunity to develop yourself, get some education, get some skills, and then it's like, okay, now, I mean, it's a tutorial, and now there's like a game level for you to go out and like try to apply those skills to, but also have to develop new skills or find, go down a path. Like I spent years doing things that, you know, I didn't end up choosing to continue to do, but those were really informative and helpful in terms of, you know, moving towards where I've got to. And I think it's, I don't know, like in my best moments, I remember like life is just kind of a game, with all sorts of varying difficulty levels and plot twists and whatnot. But you know, as much as we can like stay focused on like our goals and like how do I get to these things, then it becomes easier. And there just isn't as much like external validation as in school. Right? Don't have that like for every 4 weeks someone's telling me how I'm doing. Well, I mean, maybe I should tell my employees how they're doing more, but you know, it's just different, and it's process, and it's like, yeah, things just aren't humming in the same way that they're made to seem like they are in school.
So, I mean, one of the things I'm getting out of your answer is that the old model of school is increasingly irrelevant, but learning has never been more important. But how you do that learning, where it happens, the rate, you know, that's just really opening up in all kinds of interesting ways.
Like I never went to school to learn how to make a film.
Yeah.
I know how to make a film. Like I, you know, learned that by making my own films. I also never went to school to how to run a business. Maybe I should have done that, but I didn't, and I'm still learning how to do that. And you know,
or maybe you hire someone who is good at that, right? And you free yourself up for something else.
Absolute dream is to hire me and just leave him with all the stuff, and then I'll flounce out to Mexico and just make creative thoughts. But yeah, like you can't. You're never fully prepared for life, right? You're always adapting to life that's happening in real time.
Yeah.
I mean, my perspective going in and getting an education was never the idea that I would get an education and then I'd use that education to get myself a job in that field. My perspective is I'm going in to learn some skills. I'm going to learn how to do something interesting, and I might use it later. I might not, but I'll have, grown as a person and grown my knowledge in some subjects. Just because when I was in high school, my background is actually in film as well. I did a 5-year film program, and I thought about going into film, but I decided to take a different route into psychology just so I could, diverse a little bit. And I've always imagined that later on in my life that I'll come and bring the two together and merge them in some way. But yeah, I think education, the value of education for itself is a lot more than what you get out of it at the end in terms of job prospects or anything. So,
and it's like, it's so wonderful because like more than any time in the history of humanity, like learning is accessible. Like you can log on to LinkedIn Learning through the VPL, and for free, you just get all this stuff, right? Like, Wikipedia exists. It's amazing. Udemy, you can go back. Like, it's just like things used to be so like we encounter sometimes, and they're kind of fun when we do. Like we definitely get to challenges that aren't sourceable for solutions. And those are kind of fun because then we just have to try to do it ourselves. But like for so many things, if you don't know how to do it, you can just find it in like 6 seconds and it'll tell you how to do it. And you can, it's so great. And so I think, as far as your point, like learning's so important in as much.
Well, and riffing on that, I mean, I use YouTube all the time because I'm trying to learn woodworking, just teaching myself. And I might watch 4 different woodworkers teach you how to use a bandsaw, right? It's the same skill, but you're getting all these different perspectives. And again, traditional models, it's not like that. It's you go to one class, you have one mentor, you have one textbook. It's expensive, access, time, location, everything is defined, and you have to change your life to go to school at that time with that teacher, that course, and maybe they offer it, maybe they don't. And now you do it in your bed. You do it at the coffee table. You do it in Mexico, right? And multiple different ways.
Yeah, I think that's really how education is going to change, especially since COVID, is that it's going to be a lot more accessible to everybody than it used to be. So, which will be neat. It'll be fun to follow.
Yeah, especially when you add the open education movement on top of that, right? Which allows you to share resources, remix the resources, you keep them, use them for free copyright. That's also a very important development.
Yeah, and I think like at the core of the work that we do now, like game engines like don't charge you money, right? Unless you're making a bunch of money, they just use it. Like it's fun. Go off and like work out and break.
Unity did that, right? Didn't they make their entire training free?
Yeah, Unity's all free. Unreal's now like expanded to have like a really robust free license, like kind of particularly for people like me who are coming at it from less of a programming space and more of a creative space. And it's like it's just wonderful because like that's how their tools develop, right?
Yeah.
So there's something maybe a little nefarious about us all being like the guinea pigs for their stuff, but I mean, lots of it's like it's open source. Like the Unreal Engine is open source, and so it's really cool. Some of those democratic digital democracy sort of elements that are just they're really making everything accessible.
So speaking of nefarious, what are your thoughts on the metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like obviously thrilled by the metaverse. Something I'm certainly going to be glad to participate in as it evolves. I don't get too caught up in like the big picture discussions about it because I don't know. It's just always been clear to me like we are a small little studio, and like we're not sinking or like we're sinking or swimming based on how we keep ourselves positioned in our our market, not what the giant things are. And I've always felt like that ever since we got into XR with like the sort of very hyperbolic discussions of the year of VR or the year that VR is done or AR is going to be everything. It's like none of it ever happens. It's all just kind of like chugging forward. And I think that there are people thinking about this stuff in ways that just like confound me. Like I can't even imagine the vision that they're, you know, delivering and trying to execute on, to be thinking like, what is it going to be like in 40 years? Like I'm still trying to like scratch my head, wrap my head around like, why do I care about NFTs? I'm like, I don't get it. And there are smart people with good track records being like, this is a thing, right? So yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. I think it's also going to be sad. You know, I do have moments at times of like, you know, virtualizing things is existentially like it's a bit of a downer, right? Like I think about like I struggle to sit and read a book in the way that I did when I was a kid, because
I mean, it's a little like predicting what the internet was going to be 40 years ago. Right. And there's some really bizarre conversations when you hear people like Mark Zuckerberg talking about creating these opportunities for embodiment in the metaverse. And it's exciting, and you see these people floating to concerts, and then they float over to a restaurant. And there's always something that's disturbing about the notion of embodiment in VR, because it's exactly the opposite. You don't have a bodied experience. It's a visual experience, maybe a low-level tactile experience, but it's not an embodied experience. Walking into a forest or jumping into a lake is an embodied experience. So there's a lot of strange talk about this thing.
Totally. And like, I definitely feel that same kind of like, and also there's a side of me that's like, you know, thrilled at the transhumanist possibilities of a future. And I definitely like get some sense of, you know, peace from thinking that, you know, humans as a species are just constantly organizing and replicating, and maybe to a point where we organize ourselves into like a higher form of like some sort of like cyborg hive entity. But that's not happening right now in our lives. And so like the real repercussions of like divorcing ourselves from, you know, real experience, I think it is sad. And it's interesting because like I think Steve Jobs got a lot of heat for like not wanting his kid to use an iPhone. And I'm definitely like, I'm starting to like recognize that in myself, where like I work in the stuff and I make the stuff, but I really want to have boundaries away from the technology and the content. And like I've given up social media and I stopped watching things because it's, technology is like a really powerful force, and it doesn't wait for us to assent to it. And so I think that's something that certainly we can all be very, very mindful of, because it's nefarious. And as you said, it's lousy that they stole that name. It's just so stupid. Like, meta is a great word, and now we're all going to just be like kind of cringing every time we say it. But you know, I think there's like really exciting possible, like, you know, anarchistic efforts that are, you know, aligned with blockchain, and you know, certainly anything that's virtual and online is policeable, but not, I mean, probably not as much as like the world is now.
Right. Yeah.
So I think anything that allows like a flame of resistance to hegemony to thrive is great. And
well, I think, I mean, we've seen that with every technology, right? I mean, you think of books, and they were sources of propaganda and control, but they're also sources of, you know, pamphlets of opposition. And then radio can be a vast source of propaganda and mind control, but it can also be ways of, you know, kind of undermining various forces. And then TV the same, and then the internet, and maybe now metaverse. So those forces just keep replicating, they get more and more complex as space starts to fold in on itself, and you get all these different bifurcations and pathways that you're not even aware of necessarily. But the pattern is always there, right? The great struggle of power and influence.
Yeah, it's like I mean, they're like symbiotic in a way, right? Like power and resistance, and there's always an effort to create more control, but then there's always that impulse, and there's always a way.
It's the Joker smirking at Batman, right? Saying, "You need me."
I mean, this Australian guy just dropped like a giant repository of NFT GIFs, or they're JPEGs, like these things that are supposedly like kind of this rarefied collector's item, and he just like got them all because you can just take a screenshot, and they've been like flooded through the internet. And so it's like, okay, so you've got the blockchain that verifies yours is unique, but the thing isn't. And there's always people who are going to want to tear holes in the stuff, and that gives me hope.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Although those things do not give me hope, because obviously some terrible things were willfully being done within that organization.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But sometimes you need those people who want to get their hands dirty and mess up the system a little bit, because that's usually where a lot of good change comes out of those situations. So.
Well, we are approaching the end of our time here. It's been a fascinating conversation, and like you said, I think we could talk for hours into the night over a fireplace and some hot chocolate, maybe.
That sounds nice.
Very Christmassy.
Yeah. Any sort of last thoughts you want to leave us with, Sean, or insights or jokes, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not the joking type. That's part of the reason I like this notion of developing a talk about mistakes, because I think there's humor that's easy to contain.
Right.
No, I mean, just like, thank you very much for having me. I think I said this to you in a previous chat, Farhad, but like these talks about like the work I do are always helpful for me. When I'm trying to find like what's important or what do I think about this, like they're really pleasant. They're always like, going home with some things to think about. So thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity. Definitely like to I'm going to certainly go back and do some notes on this and try to build, like, there's something here I'd like to explore further. But as far as like last thoughts, just like it's all process, right? Like whatever we're doing in our lives, like whether we're doing design or trying to start a family or wanting to move somewhere, like it's all process. And as much as we can be conscious of that as it happens, and like be gentle on ourselves for our mistakes, but I'll acknowledge them as mistakes, but just it's not, we don't sweat it, then it just becomes easier to do that which is going to continue to happen, right? We're just going to continue to try to do things and not do them quite as well as we had hoped. And that's cool. Like I don't always, like, you catch me on a good day, I'm really feeling this stuff. You catch me on a Monday 4 p.m. might not be so there, but I'm not doing my life better from that sort of antagonism. It's like just accepting that there's only so much we can do, and we try to do our best.
Amen, brother.
So thank you very much, both of you, for organizing this, and thanks y'all for listening in and sharing your thoughts.
Absolutely. And I want to thank all the participants as well for your great questions and your patience. And Josie for a fantastic job emceeing. Well done. You got the gig. Simi Kaur, who has done a lot of work leading up to today's presentation, and Jasmine Chen, who helped create the poster and other aspects. So thanks to the VR team. It's a great lab, and very proud to be working with all of you. All right, that's ended up here, and thanks again, Sean, and good luck to all your projects, and keep doing what you do.
Great. Thanks so much, guys. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yeah.